Steve, can you tell me what the factors are for the credit scores?
Well, basically there are 5 factors that influence credit scores. Fair Isaac, the company that keeps track, that actually calculates these scores, have shared with us the 5 factors. The first one is 35% is your payment history. That's factor number 1. Factor number 2 is the extent of indebtedness, which is 30% of your credit score. Factor number 3 is length of credit history, which is 15% of your score. Number 4, new lines of credit, which is 10% of your score. And factor number 5, type of credit, which is 10% of your credit score.
So it's not all about paying your bills on time.
No. We're really going to break it down even further. Look at it as a pie chart.
Okay.
The first one, the purple area here, is the 35% of your credit history. That is the component that mainly defines how you pay your bills now and how you've paid them in the past and how you'll possibly pay them in the future.
Okay.
This is probably the most damaging or the greatest asset to some people. They go back 7 years. Whenever you're late on anything on your credit, it dates back to 7 years. And we're going to discuss that a little more in detail. If you were to have a collection account that was, say, dated 2002, and you paid it in 2004, when do you think that 7 years would start?
I do know that question,
Okay.
or that answer. That's going to start in 2004, so you're going to go
Exactly.
7 years from then. It's from your
Exactly.
last activity.
DLA, they call it, date of last activity.
Right.
Which means your payment history is going to look like that you've been late or that's been a bad mark on your file since 2004, when in reality it was put on your credit in 2002.
So is it better to not pay it?
Well, you want to pay it. There's just certain avenues you can take. With what we'll discuss are certain things and precautions you can take to try to get the best scenario possible when you encounter that.
Okay.
Lots of people do. So 35% of your score is your payment history. We're going to discuss some of the control that we have on that, and that's probably the biggest factor that we can deal with.
Okay.
And improve it. The second one, is 30%, is the amount of debt that you owe. A lot of people have, the American population has a lot of debt in general. And a lot of that spread over credit cards. Now, we've discussed this before. Give me what you think is the best scenario for having the amount of debt you want on a credit card.
Well, what I tell my investors is that if they want a credit score of 700 and above, they need to remain below the 50% mark.
Good.
So if they have a credit card for $5,000, in their mind, they need to make sure that their top end is $2,500. And that they have to have a couple of cards. They don't want to just have one card.
Good advice, because most of the time people have one favorite card they use.
Right.
And that's easy because it has a very good interest rate.
Mm-hmm.
They have other cards that have high interest rates and they don't use those cards. The unfortunate part is that one card that is their favorite card might have most of the debt on there.
Right.
And it doesn't really take in consideration the fact that you have this unused credit on these other cards. As a whole, it looks at exactly how much debt you have on each card individually. So one solution would be, if let's say you had a favorite credit card of 8% interest, and the other cards are high. What you'd want to do is probably spread that debt evenly across the other cards to keep it below 50%. Even though you're paying the higher interest, it's going to affect your score a great deal.
So when I pull a credit report and I get the credit scores, and the credit scores are lower than they should be, that is the main reason why.
That's one possibility. Remember, we did discuss the history. So the history is a big factor, but how much debt they carry on each card.
Right.
Now, there are some solutions. Let's assume that a guy has, or a woman has a credit card of a $5,000 limit, and she has good credit.
Right. She's not paid anything late.
But she has, say, $4,500 on the card. One way would be to try to raise the interest, the balance on that card.
The limit?
Yeah, raise the limit on the card so that that it looks and reflects that she's only using 50% of the balance on the card rather than the full amount.
So it doesn't look like she's in dire straits.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's one way to do it, is to very cautiously ask them to increase the limit on that card. Because if you have a bad credit history, sometimes they'll take that card away from you, or they'll reevaluate your credit and lower it. So you would only put that request in if you know that your history has been good.
Okay.
So raise that on
And
there.
so they don't necessarily have to pay the car down to the halfway point.
Exactly.
They can actually raise the limit.
Exactly,
So
because
that gives more options.
exactly. Another way to do it, another way that we deal with this is if you encounter somebody who may not have a lot of credit cards. And the other factors we'll cover in this pie chart, I'll probably go back to it and answer the same question here. But one thing we'll share here is that if you have a family member or someone that you trust that can put you on as an authorized user on a card, that not only that has a good balance, below
Right.
50%, that looks good on your credit report, provided the fact that they maintain that card below 50%. But the most benefit that it has for you is that it gives you stability,
Right.
a history. That card may be 10 years old, and all of a sudden now you have a history with that credit card company of 10 years.
Wonderful.
If I was to try to say that FICO scores or credit scores in general were to be defined in one word, it's stability. The more stable you look
Got it.
on a credit report, the better you are.
Got it. That's great. Great information.
Thank you. The second one we kind of discussed a little bit is length of credit history, which is what we just discussed, having a credit card for a long period of time. Do you remember in, I don't know, years ago when it was said that you cut up credit cards that you're not using?
Yes.
And people were said if you're not using it, cut it up. I don't know what the logic was. Potential debt that you could get into would hurt
Oh,
your
every
credit.
mortgage broker wanted you to cut up your credit cards, and every lender.
Yeah.
Didn't make any sense.
Well, the problem is that we found out this information came to us in Fair Isaac a couple of years ago. So we really were guessing what it took to raise a score. It really was kind of the blind lead to blind. 15% of that score is going to be dictated how long you've had a credit card. So if your parents had a Sears card for 20 years and they put you on as authorized user, that would go on your credit report with the same length of time that they've had it. So therefore you satisfy this need here of 50% of the length of credit.
Well, let me ask you a question. Can I
Okay.
stop you right there?
Yes.
What if you're 24 and they've had the credit card for 20 years?
It appears that you're 4 years old and had credit. And
Yeah.
I understand, but it doesn't.
Is that gonna make a
no, it doesn't-
difference?
That factor does not come
Okay.
into play.
Just wanted to check.
Interesting, though, that
Yeah.
you'd be spending money, had a credit card since you were 4 years old.
Okay.
But again, it's stability and
Okay.
how well it looks on your credit report. So those are always factors. So the rule of thumb is don't cut up old credit cards, whether you use them or not. This next one is 10% is the type of credit. This is factor number 4. Type of credit is very interesting because a lot of people, let's assume that nationally there's all these institutions people could go to, a furniture store or a diamond or a jewelry store, and they
Department
have
store.
in-house credit. Well, they really may not have in-house credit. It may be through a finance company. And a finance company is probably not the best type of credit. Types of credit mean that a major bank will look better on your credit report than a finance company.
Okay.
Okay?
Got it.
And no matter how convenient it is to get credit at the tire store or the jewelry store, it's much better to use an existing bank or a major bank to get credit.
Okay.
We don't want to pick on any sort of finance companies in general, but they're out there. There's Prudential and Beneficial and different companies that are referred to as finance companies.
Okay.
So types of credit is very important, even with Citibank.
Wow.
Citibank has two, a finance company and a major bank. Citicorp and Citibank, one will give you better scores than going to the other one. So.
Oh, well, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
So you want to be careful how available credit is and make sure you're making the right choice.
Okay.
The fifth factor is 10% of new credit. Now, this can be kind of tricky. You got to be very careful as an investor to say spend credit, because you have credit cards in your wallet. There's no balance on them. You've worked with investors a lot. Have you seen that one investor come in? They love to brag about paying everything in cash. They've got great credit, and then you pull up their score, and often, what do you see?
They don't have a score.
Yeah,
Or
NA.
it's
Yeah.
an NA, or it's 500.
Yeah.
Around 500.
Very disheartening, because this person has followed all the guidelines of good spending and the advice given to him through good parents, and yet his score is low. So when you tell people that 10% of the score is the new credit, that doesn't mean you go out and apply for a new credit card all the time.
Right.
That may mean that you might be willing to use that one card in your wallet that you haven't used for a while. It's not always most advantageous situation to have a zero balance on all credit cards.
Right.
Put a balance on it, use it periodically. I often refer to credit scores as growing a plant. And you can keep it in the sun and water it, and it pretty much takes care of itself. But there are certain things you have to do to water the plant. And one of them is new lines of credit.
Well, let me ask you this. I don't use gas cards,
Okay.
but I put my gas and my groceries on a credit card, and I'm constantly using them over and over every month. And I do pay them, but there's always, a balance on there. And is that keeping my credit scores good? Is that a good thing to do, or is that a bad thing to do?
And that's a good question, because timing is everything. When you pull a credit score, remember I referred to it as an ad hoc system, which means they're dynamic. So timing on pulling a credit score is very important.
Okay.
You could predict and say the third week of the month might be the best time.
Oh, wow.
Possibly, not all the time. There's
Not all the
lots of
time.
variables.
Now
But
that I didn't know.
yeah, but if you're using your card
Yeah.
for all these purchases, there's going to be a time in the month where that card has a higher balance than other times.
Well, I never go past halfway.
Okay, that's
Ever.
a good rule of thumb.
Right.
So if you're going to use that card for other purchases, use it 50% of it for there.
Okay.
But don't be afraid to use the other cards periodically.
Oh, no, I spread it out over a couple of different cards,
because
actually.
you want to have a variety. I remember somebody asked me one time what the optimum amount of credit cards a person should have is. And I myself have had many, many credit cards. And and I've had a good score too. So if I was to give the answer, I think that came up 3 credit cards, 3 major store cards, 3 major banks, a couple gas cards and store cards. So maybe a total of 6. Maybe.
6.
I'm just saying that may not apply to everybody, but the rule of thumb is don't be afraid to get credit, and when you do get credit, understand that it's the major banks that give you the best credit score.
Okay,
So it's good understanding from there.
wonderful.
The next thing we're going to talk about is the next generation scores.
Okay.
So that will be our next topic.